So let's talk about so many things we're learning from this new document dump from the Bryan Kohberger case. We're learning about injuries on Bryan's face and hands as early as October 2022, as well as November 2022, when the confessed, convicted mass killer said he did enter the 1122 King Road house and kill Maddie Mogan, Kaylee Gonzalez, Ethan Chapin, and Xana Kernodle. So now, in this document dump, we have information about Bryan's WSU office mate and what he thought about Bryan, and from the Idaho 4 book, how I'm relating that to an October 14th, 2022 incident with a woman named Ava Wood. She lived right across the street from the murder house, but on October 14th, she heard someone climbing up her stairs and trying her door. On Friday, October 14th, 2022, something strange was going on directly across the street from the 1122 King Road house in Moscow, Idaho. Ava Wood told police that she had heard someone climb up the metal steps to her apartment and try to open her door at 1 a.m., about 4 weeks before her friends Maddie, Kaylee, Xana, and Ethan would be brutally killed only 33 feet from her front door. Ava was seriously blessed that her door stayed closed that cold October night. Ava had installed a deadbolt lock during her junior year, one that thwarted the mysterious intruder seeking to enter, carrying God knows what to do Lord knows what once inside her place. You could hear the jingle of my doorknob. It's a finicky doorknob, she explained in the new book titled The Idaho 4, An American Tragedy. It was an event important enough to prompt Bryan's future criminal defense lawyer, Ann Taylor, to call Ava and question her thoroughly about the attempted break-in. Ironically, October 14th was the same day that Bryan Kohberger had been pulled over by a female Washington State University officer for a traffic offense. He used the opportunity to debate with her about getting stuck in an intersection whilst attempting to make a left turn. Bryan's blue eyes darted directly into her body cam and all around as he mansplained to the officer how he had more leeway back in Pennsylvania to hang out in intersections.
So would you explain that to me a little bit further? So in Pennsylvania, when you're stuck like in their intersection, you have to make the left. So what would the appropriate thing for me to have done then? Just yeah, there was a little bit of confusion with speeding because someone had stopped. I wasn't sure what they were doing, and then they put on their light to turn. Mm-hmm. So I thought that maybe they were letting me go through. Oh. Did you see that?
No. Mm-mm.
Yeah, like right before I made the turn, there was someone who made a right.
Yes.
They didn't have their signal on, so I wasn't sure if they were just waiting.
Mm-hmm.
But in that situation, the best thing to do then would be back up.
There.
Yeah, I was just slightly into the crosswalk, so where I'm from Pennsylvania, we actually don't have like crosswalks.
Oh,
so even if you're kind of slightly, there's a little bit more leeway as well. Like there are a few lines. Like there's one white line and there's another one in front. Like there's like a certain margin from which you can actually kind of put your vehicle, place your vehicle. I'm just curious about the law. I don't mean to.
Oh no, I can find it for you. Yeah. So I'm not writing a ticket or anything like that today. I understand you're from Pennsylvania, but in the future, don't proceed through the intersection. You can't get stopped for that alone unless you can clearly just clear it right away.
Okay.
So
then basically, I understand.
You're just supposed to wait behind the white line. Drivers do it all the time. But
it never even occurred to me that was actually something wrong. But well, except for the fact that I was blocking the crosswalk, which is what I went through.
And states vary a lot from laws. Like Pennsylvania might not even have that law, but in Washington we do.
I'm actually just from a very rural area, so we just don't have crosswalks.
Oh.
Unless I visit an area where there are crosswalks, and then it's not very frequent.
Yeah.
I do apologize if I was asking you too many questions about the law. I wasn't trying to
No, not at all. Like I understand you're not from here, so if you don't, a lot of people don't know a bunch of laws. Like I only know it because this is what I do. But if you're ever curious on any more laws, just RCW, and they can be hard to read because it's in like legal language, but hope that helps.
Definitely.
Yeah, have a good day.
Definitely, you too.
Thanks.
He falsely claimed there were no crosswalks in Pennsylvania. Could Bryan have been the self-same person who attempted to stealthily enter Ava's apartment at 1 o'clock that morning, thankfully failing, then went on to argue with the cop several hours later? Okay, thank God Ava's door had a deadbolt. Ugh, it just makes you so weary and sad, and so many feelings about how we all wish Bryan Kohberger couldn't have made it into the 1122 King Road house. How did he know he could? Maybe he tried that door before. Maybe as he roamed around like a vampire in the middle of the night, he may have learned which houses he could get into easily. Maybe he learned people's routines. So anyway, first I want to talk about Bryan Kohberger's office mate at Washington State University. They were both criminology students, both teacher's assistants. Now, this interview that was just released is with a man named Kai-Xuan Chen, Leon. He's from Taiwan. He told police about how badly, urgently Bryan wanted a girlfriend, how Bryan would lie to him. I'll just call him Leon. Bryan would lie to Leon, how he manipulated him into doing his homework. What's most significant is that the injuries he saw on Bryan's knuckles, at least on 2 occasions, on Bryan's face looking like a scratch. I mean, there's so much. And the fact that he believes he witnessed these things not just in November 22, the month of the horrible murders, but also the previous month in October. How Bryan told Leon basically that he was in a car accident. He was trying to explain away these injuries. We're going to talk about how I'm tying this interview with Leon, his words, to Ava Wood's testimony about hearing someone trying to enter her apartment. I don't think we can discount it. October 14th, 2022, right across the street from 1122 King Road. How Bryan's lawyer found that testimony, that incident, so important that Ava told police that Ann Taylor, Bryan's lawyer, called Ava and grilled her about the incident and what all that means. Friday, October 14th, 2022. Ava Wood reports someone tried to open her door at 1 a.m., the same day that Bryan was detained as part of a traffic stop by a female WSU officer in his 2015 white Hyundai Elantra. Ava Wood, a friend of the Idaho 4, reported a weird occurrence at her apartment on Queen Road, right near 1122 King Road. Ava told police that on Friday at 1 a.m. she'd heard someone climb up the metal steps to her apartment, which was across the street from 1122 King Road, and try the door. You could hear the jingle of my doorknob. It's a finicky doorknob, she said, but the door stayed closed because Ava had put in a deadbolt during her junior year. She told police what she now tells Ann Taylor, Bryan's lawyer, that, at the time, she'd looked on Snapchat to see if any of her friends were in the area, saw one, Mason Bangman, and texted him to ask if he had just tried to let himself in. No, he'd said. So Ava asked him to check the street. She watched through her bedroom window as Mason and a couple of friends walked into view. He texted Ava that he couldn't see anyone. So Ava went to sleep. She didn't think any more about it until Xana, Ethan, Kaylee, and Maddie were murdered in the house across the street, and then she wondered aloud to the police, was the murderer the same person who had tried to get into her apartment 4 weeks earlier? Ann Taylor asks her repeatedly to describe what she can see of the street from her home. Ava says she can see the front door of 1122 King Road and the street leading up to it. Taylor asks her if the police ever got back to her about the October incident. The answer is no. After Kohberger was arrested and Ava read the probable cause affidavit, she asked if anyone in law enforcement knew if October 14th was one of the 12 times Kohberger's phone had pinged in the King Road area. No one will tell her. It occurs to Ava that if Kohberger wasn't in the area in the pre-dawn hours of October 14th, the defense could argue there was another predator running around. But if he was, Ava guesses from Taylor's other questions that the lawyer is looking for holes in the accounts of the victim's friends. And then we'll talk about what Moscow PD told me about that incident when I requested the incident report, the body cam videos, all that stuff. It's a lot to go through. I'm taking it piecemeal, topic by topic. I still haven't read through more than 314 documents, but we're getting there, and we're getting like a fuller, complete picture to kind of put in our timeline. Okay, so Kai, I like the name Kai. Maybe I should call him Kai instead of Leon. He has several names. But anyway, Kai is a Washington State University PhD student. Again, he's a teaching assistant, and he started at WSU from August 2022 to the present. At least that's what his LinkedIn says. He's still there in Pullman, Washington. So now, from all the documents and from reading Bryan Kohberger's interview with police in Pennsylvania, I can't wait to hear that audio. I'm not sure if it was video recorded. I hope to God it was. Anyway, we've learned that Bryan arrived at Washington State University on July 1st, 2022.
Hi, my name is Bryan. Would you be able to give me a haircut tomorrow by any chance?
So we know he started looking for somewhere to get his hair cut. We've heard that audio, seeking new places to start off his new life. Where can he get a haircut? I'm tripping over the fact that he arrived there July 1st, and it took Bryan fewer than 5 months to wreak havoc on that area and make a name for himself, not as, some great man, wonderful student. No. He made a name for himself as one of the most evil mass killers in history by striking down 4 young, beautiful college students. I'm sitting here thinking in the mind, well, I don't want to be in his mind, but Bryan Kohberger, what was he, around 28 years old? Yeah, he was born in 1994. He was nearing 28 years old. He really wanted a girlfriend. Part of me, I keep thinking of that song, Cool Kids. I wish that I could be like the cool kids. I cannot sing. I wish that I could be like the cool kids. They seem to fit in. In reading everything I've put together today in this script, I feel like that was Bryan's purpose. He wanted to be like one of the cool kids, but he was still doing it the wrong way. Manipulative, lying, sneaking around, using people, and maybe even feeling entitled. Like Bryan felt like perhaps he deserved one of these beautiful women. So this is so fascinating. We're finding out about Bryan's coworkers. He shared spaces with them. Now, finding out about Kai. In a search warrant dated December 29th, 2022, we had already learned Bryan's office was inside of Wilson Short Hall on the WSU Pullman campus. And that address was 1475 Glen Terrell Mall in Pullman. So it's a multi-story brick building. It houses multiple offices. They were searching Bryan's office number 12. He didn't have that office all to himself. Maybe he wanted it all to himself. But anyway, Bryan shared office number 12 with 2 fellow WSU students. We've talked about Ki-Zon-Chin, and we've heard before Na-Young Ko. I can't wait to read Na-Young Ko's interview wherever it is. Pouring through these documents, sometimes it's hard to find stuff, but we've heard before about Na-Young Ko from the Dateline episode, where she not only shared an office with Bryan, but supposedly she shared some kind of closer, deeper friendship. She shared an office with Bryan. She lived right across the hall from him. So that's like working with someone and living right near them. That's a lot. Allegedly, she spent nights with Bryan, according to Dateline. I have so much in my head. I always try and get the sources correct. So check below for links to my sources. But I don't know if Na-Young Ko was just, Mrs. Right Now, just someone to be there with. I'm not saying her and Bryan had any kind of intimate relationship. But when you hear she allegedly spent time with Bryan overnight, it does make you wonder. But she's the self-same woman who reportedly found it weird. Some stuff was moved around in her apartment. She reached out to Bryan and was like, "You're good with technology, please install these cameras." He helped her. He installed the cameras, and then only later did she realize, oh, Bryan could be looking at me. So that's why I really want to find her interview. If I can find it anywhere, then we'll cover it in another video. For now, we only have Kai's interview. So he was another office mate of Bryan's. Their office was on the ground floor. It had the number 12 on a placard next to the door, and it had 3 names on a piece of paper taped to the door, one which was Bryan Kohberger. So by late August 2022 in Pullman, according to the Idaho 4 book, this is how the cohorts and students started to meet one another. It is the week before classes began at Washington State University in the small town of Pullman. The little airstrip Pullman shares with nearby Moscow, Idaho, is just a 7-minute drive from the hilly campus. So it's very close. WSU is a large school, much larger than UI. So I learned that. I didn't really know that. University of Idaho is smaller than WSU. WSU apparently has more than 30,000 students, and its territory is marked by the massive billboard bearing the logo of the Cougars. That's their football team. They're competitive in their division, unlike Moscow's Vandals. Sick burn there. But no, I remember reading somewhere in Bryan Kohberger's interview when cops picked him up in Pennsylvania, they made small talk, before he insisted he get a lawyer. They talked about innocuous things like sports, and reportedly Bryan was not into football, but he liked baseball. I was thinking, yeah, that tracks. Baseball is a slower sport, I don't know, it's a little bit different. Football is so like roughhousing, and I used to call it barbaric. But anyway, so that kind of tracks. My granddad loved baseball. But it makes me wonder, if Bryan wasn't into football, was it still Bryan at that Vandals game? Remember like the day before the murders, November 12th? That guy that was all dressed up and covered, it really looked like it could have been Bryan Kohberger. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. The book says football is not the school's only selling point. This August, she means in 2022, WSU's famed Criminology and Criminal Justice graduate program has attracted an international elite bunch, a self-described cohort of 11 students, 7 women and 4 men, who will be pursuing master's or PhD degrees. One student comes from South Korea, and another, Sai, is from Bangladesh. Leon, who is Kai, is from Taiwan. So that makes sense because when we read his interview in a bit with police, they needed an FBI translator there. So, in August 2022, at this meet and greet with 20-odd or so faculty members, the students pile their paper plates high with mounds of Panda Express. It is pretty good. And they size one another up. They make small talk and learn about their different areas of interest, ranging from cyber crime to human trafficking to police militarization and domestic terrorism to drug crimes and drug courts. So one person says he studies maps, a subject the others can't quite fathom his interest in. I wonder who studied maps. I was wondering if she meant Kohberger. Anyway, at 42, Ben Roberts is the second oldest in the group. Oh, so I guess he's second oldest to Kohberger, perhaps? I just want to know these little details. He suspects he's the only one from the West Coast. He looks at the others' serious, scholarly demeanors and thinks he's probably the only one who has ever used a chainsaw. So he must be an outdoor woodsy. I do like using my Craftsman. I feel like I'm Tim Allen. What was that show? You know what I mean. Ben notices one of the students in particular. His name is Bryan Kohberger. Bryan stands out because he's painfully thin. He does look very, very thin in that one headshot of him. I think it might be a WSU or maybe it's a DeSalle's headshot. He looks very thin. His eyes move too quickly, and the bags under them are dark and too prominent for someone his age. Yeah, because he doesn't sleep at night. I guess he only naps during the day. Ben also notices that Bryan never takes off his jacket, even in the August heat. By this description, with Bryan still being so thin as of August 2022, it makes me wonder, did he leave all the heroin and prior habits behind? That's a theme throughout this Idaho 4 book. We'll get to this point, but you know how Bryan broke in the house of Jeremy Saba's mom. Jeremy Saba was his friend, eventually died of an overdose. Well, before he died, Jeremy Saba got popped for DUI, possession, and all this stuff, and he went to jail. So Jeremy's mom got a call from Bryan, and she's like, oh, how kind. He's so, sweet. He's calling. She's like, me and my husband or whatever, we're about to go visit Jeremy tomorrow at 1 o'clock in jail or whatever. You want to take the slot after us? And Bryan's like, sure. I'll meet you there at the jail. And does he meet her there? there? No, she's standing outside, I guess, after their visit. Like, where's Bryan? Bryan's in, I'll just say, Jeremy's mom's house. According to the Idaho 4 book, he uses that opportunity to be manipulative and know, okay, they'll be gone visiting Jeremy. I'm not going to go visit my supposed best friend in the world. He broke into the Saba home, who used to be their next door neighbors, and stole his mom's iPad. She came home, she could see, oh, there's theft. This is why he was calling me. You know, he didn't care about visiting Jeremy. He wanted an opportunity to break in.
How does it feel to know the only thing you failed more miserably at than being a murderer is trying to be a rapper?
August 2016, Indian Mountain Lake, Pennsylvania. Bryan breaks in, and again. Well, Bryan didn't turn into the next hip-hop star. Instead, within a couple of years, he isn't allowing the word of God that his desperate mother tries to get him to absorb to sink in. Instead, the 22-year-old Bryan is letting something demonic sink into his veins and sharpening his thieving skills to fund it. The book says Bryan sits in the basement. He's out of drugs, of cash, of friends. Now his mom is on him to go to Bible study with her. She thinks that will fix him. He's gone a couple of times. A text beeps on his phone. Bryan reads it. Maybe there's something to the Bible stuff after all. This is divine timing. Jeremy Saba has been arrested for a DUI and possession of drugs. He's in jail. One man's misfortune is another's opportunity. Bryan calls a familiar person. Connie, he says. To the woman who picks up, she trusts him, wrongly. Bryan, she says, and thanks him for what she assumes is a call of condolence and support. Jeremy's mom tells him that she and Jeremy's dad will visit their son tomorrow at the jail by the courthouse in Broadheadsville. As Bryan hopes, the trusting woman shares the time they're planning to go. Would Bryan come visit Jeremy right after? Bryan says yes. But as he ends the call, he might have been forming his real plan. Connie later said that their absence from their home gave him the perfect window to get what he needed. He used to live next door, so he knew the house, knew where Connie kept her jewelry and where she left her iPad, things he could sell to get his next fix, and he knew exactly how to break in through the garage. The next day, he executes the plan perfectly. As Connie and Jerry Saba leave the courthouse in Broadheadsville, Connie wonders where Bryan is. Why hasn't he shown up? He sounded so concerned and solicitous on the phone. Something Jeremy once said nags at her. Bryan is manipulative. When the Sabas pull up to their house in effort, she sees at once why Bryan didn't come. Someone has been in their home. The door from the garage has been forced open. Her iPad is gone. She doesn't need to wonder who the thief is. She knows. Will she call the police? Her fingers hover over her phone. She thinks about Bryan's mom, Mary Ann, a teacher who, like Connie, works in the local school district. Mary Ann has, in the past occasionally and uncharacteristically shared some of Bryan's struggles with her. There was his Asperger's syndrome diagnosis, and later the drugs. She puts the phone away without calling anyone. She doesn't know any of the specifics, but she intuits that the Kohberger family is in enough pain right now without Connie Saba adding to their problems. Effort, Pennsylvania 2018. Bryan claims he shows up out of really thin air to make amends. Listen to this next curious passage from the book. Does it really sound like Bryan showed up in Connie's home again because he was going through some 12 steps? She hasn't seen him in months. Then she turns, and suddenly there he is, in her kitchen, standing there, unannounced, startling her. Jeremy's mom, Connie, isn't even sure which door he came through. He is just there, tall, well over 6 feet, towering over her, eyes bugging out, and he's thin, she notices, really, really thin. Bryan, she says, what are you doing here? Even as she asks the question, she knows the answer, because she knows what they teach in rehab. He's come to atone, to make amends. He's come to say he's sorry for stealing from her. I knew it was you, Connie tells him. There's much more Bryan could say, that he started working toward a psychology degree at Northampton Community College. that he's lonely. He misses Jeremy, but he doesn't say any of that. He doesn't get the chance. After he's done apologizing, Connie thanks him. And then, with as much kindness as she can muster, Connie asks Bryan to leave and never come back to the Saba house. She needs to protect her son from the tall, newly thin former neighbor. Maybe, as he claims, he doesn't do drugs anymore. Trippy, huh? If Bryan was newly thin in 2018, and just showed up unannounced in Connie's kitchen, should we really believe that he was there to apologize? Or is the true answer that Bryan was breaking in her house again and perhaps concocted a ruse, pretending he was there to apologize? It makes me wonder, as the following 4 pivotal years began to count down to that horrible day of retribution for Bryan, did he ever leave the stuff alone? Or did Bryan bring all of his evil habits from Pennsylvania with him to darken the doorways of Idaho and Washington? And then at some point later, supposedly Bryan goes off to rehab. He's supposed to be rehabilitated. She's in her kitchen. She's startled. Guess who shows up? It's Bryan Kohberger. Just there. And she was like, oh, she assumed, okay, he's doing his 12 steps, or he's doing his repentance, or whatever you call that step where you're making amends. I saw it a totally different way. I was like, wait a minute. He just showed up in her house, in her kitchen, startled her, and to the point where she was like, okay, I accept it. I'm not going to let you finish talking about all your new exploits. Just get out of my house and never come back. That's what she reportedly told him. But I'm thinking to myself, he probably didn't come to make amends. He was probably there again to steal. Maybe he didn't realize she would be home. That's why he just appeared like a ghost, the ghost they call him, in her kitchen. I'm wondering, was he ever truly rehabilitated? Was Bryan ever truly clean? Or did he bring his problems from Pennsylvania to Washington and Idaho with him? So the book says that Ben assumes wrongly that Bryan needs insulation on account of his willowy frame. Ben does not know about Bryan's history with heroin. He doesn't know that Bryan might be keeping his forearms covered in public to hide the telltale track marks of his past addiction. Ben is flattered when Bryan comes over to chat with him. If Bryan is still so thin at that point, that's what makes me wonder. Now, of course, this isn't skinny shaming or anything. Some people are just naturally thin. It's the way I used to be growing up. But anyway, with Bryan being painfully thin, and we see him different weights throughout his life, it makes you wonder, was there some other issue there, some disordered eating, or was it due to drug use? The book says Bryan is doing a PhD, which makes him senior to Ben. So Ben is in the master's program. Bryan asks a lot of questions about Ben's background. The conversation kicks into high gear when Ben tells Bryan that he worked for the TSA. He was head of security at a small airport, and that makes Bryan light up. And Bryan says, I've worked in security too. Cool, Ben said. Where? Bryan becomes vague. Oh, back home. So I know why he became vague. Like, Bryan wanted to fit in. He wanted to show off his security skills, his security background, but he did not want to tell him where. That's because maybe he thought, oh, it's not as impressive as working at an airport or whatever. Bryan had been working as a part-time security officer in that Pleasant Valley school district, which was fine. That's admirable. Why wouldn't Bryan just tell the truth? But it's one of the many times in here I'm going to read about Bryan's dishonest nature. So that's where Bryan's mom worked, and there was a hall monitor, an older grandmother. She started having trouble breathing back then, and she even lost consciousness. Eventually, I guess she was turning purple. But there was this security guard, Luis Fuentes. This is what the Pocono Record had published. Luis told Bryan, go get the AED, the defibrillator. So it says, disaster was averted. But the incident did make their small town newspaper. The small town in Pennsylvania, around the area where Bryan grew up with his parents, Michael and Mary Ann. We saw Mary Ann and his sister. Well, he has sisters Amanda and Melissa. So Melissa's the older one. I didn't see her at the sentencing hearing, but I believe that was Amanda, the actress, the younger one, who was there. So she was brave enough to come there. She was probably there on her mother's behalf, perhaps to help protect her mother and just be there as support with her mother, because we've learned that Bryan and his mom seem really close. They've been speaking, for hours. video calls or whatever while he's been in jail. I don't know what it'll be like when he's in prison, if he'll get those same privileges. I know about the tablets and all that. But that Pocono record was one of the only times Bryan Kohberger's name would be featured in the papers in a positive way. Different coworkers came during that incident to help Luis, and one of them was Bryan. So Luis, the security officer, told Bryan, go get the AED. Someone else was getting the asthma pump. Luis said this woman, I guess her name was Kathleen, she was turning purple. He was trying to get her attention. He was saying, Kathleen, wake up, but nothing. So someone else called 911. Bryan got the AED. Luis was doing CPR. It was an intense situation, but Luis knew this woman's life was literally in his hands. He kept his cool, focused on the woman. Bryan came back with the AED the same time that emergency personnel arrived. So I don't even know if they used the AED on her or not. Thank God she survived. I find this account humorous when I read or see some of the accounts of the pro-burger Bryan's fans. Part of me is thinking of doing a separate video about all that. Pro-burgers versus guilters. I've had to block some people on X, let me tell you. It's just over the top. But I'm truly trying to understand them. I really am. Some of Bryan Kohberger's fans are even pointing to this incident to say, see, he saved a life. And I'm like, I read the Pocono record, and never does it say Bryan Kohberger saved this woman's life. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. We've got a lot to get into in that topic. There's thunder again. I hate when people assume that the so-called guilters, those of us who believe, like Bryan confessed, that he is guilty of killing these 4 lovely souls. I hate when Bryan Kohberger's fans claim, it's only because of his Asperger's or his autism and poor Bryan. I hate when they ascribe more thunder. I hate when they ascribe any conditions to his guilt, as if they're equating any autistic nature, anything, as if to say, he doesn't understand what's going on, and he only pled guilty to avoid, death that he didn't deserve, and, they're ascribing all these qualities to him and trying to mix in Asperger's with it. That's really annoying in that way. Different time, different topic. Back to the Idaho 4 book. Bryan didn't say where home was exactly. He started being vague. So Ben started sharing some experiences he thought Bryan might have had himself as a security officer. So Ben told Bryan there were times at the airport when he found it particularly inelegant to have to exercise access control. That is, having to tell people who believed they had clearance to enter a certain area that in fact they didn't, and he had to bar their path. So I get it, maybe some hotshot is walking around the airport. I don't know if it's a pilot or someone who's thinking, I can go here. And Ben is like, nope, sorry, you don't have clearance. So Ben is like, did you have any of that? And Bryan is nodding vigorously. So Ben keeps going. And he's like, and the worst I found is when people do have the clearance, but they haven't got the right paperwork on them, like the right proof. It's so embarrassing to have to stop them going through. Bryan says, I know exactly what you mean. So Ben had wondered for a split second if that is in fact true. He said it felt like he might have been stretching. That's what he said later. But at the same time, Ben was going with the flow, like he's just meeting this kid. Bryan seems very articulate, Ben thinks. That's what a lot of people say about Bryan, he was confident, intelligent. It says Bryan basically spits words out with the fluency and confidence of someone who expects to be listened to. Ben has no idea that Bryan is in fact giving a bravura performance. I had to look that up. See, I have no shame in telling you guys when I blunder things, I get things wrong, or, I can learn from people. And when I don't know a word, I Google it. Bravura means great technical skill and brilliance shown in a performance or activity. So it's like he's saying Bryan was there at WSU just giving a performance. It wasn't really him. He was playing the role of someone he has never been, namely someone who belongs in the room. The silent, awkward introvert has been replaced for now by a confident, articulate intellectual. So that's the role Bryan was playing. And it's interesting that he had applied to WSU, we learned, and some Southern California school school. I'm like, I know they were happy he didn't make it in there. He was applying to schools where he didn't have to take the GRE. What is that, the graduate record exam? It's probably below that GMAT. I remember taking the GMAT. After I got my bachelor's in business administration, I toyed around with the idea of getting my master's. First step, take the GMAT. That test was so intense. I was like, yeah, I don't need to do this. They were like, pencils up, pencils down, and just really intense. So perhaps Bryan isn't a great test taker, I don't know. But those are the schools he honed in on. He got into WSU. It says Bryan might be figuring that at WSU he can start fresh, become the man he dreams of being. No one needs to know about his troubled past. Bryan turns from Ben and makes a beeline for the group of senior faculty members. So Bryan's probably like, oh, Ben's getting too intense, asking too many questions. Maybe he's catching me in my little deceptions already. So Bryan instead, hones in on the senior faculty members, probably hoping to charm them, ingratiate them, but that's going to be bad. That's going to work out not well. Like a Wall Street CEO, one by one, he pumps their hands and works the room. I'm Bryan, he says, and I'm excited to be here. Parts of this make me feel sorry for him, not in a weird way. It's just me trying to understand a person's personality. I mean, too bad he turned to evil. And we need to talk about what he said about Christianity. I feel so bad for his mom. I mean, his mom trying to take Bryan to Bible study with her, and he even went to Bible study with her. Obviously, she's a Christian. She was hoping it would help him. Way back when, the book talks about an instance with Jeremy Saba when he got arrested. Bryan's trying the Bible study thing a couple of times with his mom. I don't know how many times he went. But then he heard Jeremy got arrested, and he's like, oh, maybe this Bible study works after all. Let me go with my evil plan to go break into Jeremy's parents' home. So it's almost like, it's just choose this day whom you will serve. Oh, it's so many scriptures I could think of if you think it evil to serve the Lord, But just at a juncture, Bryan could have been like, Mom and Christianity, and let me take a better path. See if the Lord can help me. Find the beautiful girlfriend I want. Find this right woman for me. I'm sure he was perhaps thinking of marriage and children, nearing 30. Sometimes people start to think of these things, that path, but instead it's like, nope, I'm going to go over to this path, breaking in, wandering around like a vampire, spying on people, all this stuff. Now, let's read Kai Leon's interview so I can tell you guys what I'm talking about. It's short, but it's powerful. Okay, so this is in supplement 246 for those of us, looking at all the actual PDFs. It's Detective Brett Payne who interviewed Kai. So it says on Tuesday, October 10th, 2023. So this is nearly a year after the crimes, but it's at least the second interview police have had with Kai Leon. Kai. It says, I met with WSU student Ki-Zon-Chin, hereto referred to as Leon. In reference to this case, I was accompanied by FBI Agent Hill for this interview, as well as an FBI interpreter who was present via phone call, as Leon is from Taiwan. A lot of this stuff is redacted, but previous search warrants and the book, public information, just tell us who they're talking about. This is a summary of my interview with Leon and is not a verbatim representation of the interview. The interview was recorded and attached to this case digitally. So that's why I've gone through, and ones that really interest me, I've done separate requests, which might be the best route, because I'm thinking requesting everything. I don't know how much time that would take and how much money that would take, but if I do things separately, perhaps that would be better. Anyway, it says Leon was interviewed once previously by FBI agent Zahak Zuski in December of 2022. So they spoke with him before, closer to the crime, and now they were speaking with him again. I couldn't find that first interview, but if I find it, perhaps I'll update, do a separate video. It says Leon was a former teaching assistant with Kohberger and shared an office with him for the fall semester of 2022 at WSU. I began asking Leon to tell me how he met Kohberger. Leon stated they were both TAs for the Criminology program at WSU, and they shared an office in Wilson Short Hall. So Leon considered Kohberger a friend and stated he thought Kohberger was very intelligent but also selfish. Indeed, imagine you're from a totally different country. I mean, from Taiwan. I don't know how great his English is, but you're coming here, you're sharing an office with an American, another man, and you're just like, oh, he can be my friend. And then you learn how selfish he is and how much he's lying to you. Leon said Kohberger would often mislead him when it came to their shared work and would have Leon complete work meant for Kohberger. I mean, that's totally sad. You know, Kohberger's so intelligent. Why can't he do his own work? Instead, he's misleading or misled this foreign student who obviously, you know, you would need help. I mean, imagine us going to Taiwan. We'd have to lean on people who live there. You would expect them to be more honest with you and help you out. So Kohberger's here, another example. He's misleading Leon, having him do work that Bryan should have done. Leon says Kohberger came to his dorm room on one occasion around the time of the homicides. Leon was unsure of the exact date, but this is after Leon had asked Bryan for a ride to class. Leon also added Kohberger began to talk much more than usual after the homicide. So remember, we had heard some of these snippets before. I feel like it was Bryan was a kettle boiling over, and like, the brutality, if you've read it, of those homicides. I mean, absolutely, completely horrible. But did that give Bryan some kind of release after all these years of like, so afterward, you know, he was Mr. Chatterbox? Like, I don't know. It's sad to think. Leon characterized Bryan's conversations as those coming from someone who wanted to vent. Now, we know he's vented to other people. We'll read perhaps other interviews if we can find them about Bryan's views on so many things. Roles of women, you know, claiming the WSU advanced students, the female students, Bryan felt like they shouldn't be there. Why would he feel that way? I don't understand. Like they shouldn't have advanced degrees or something? They should just be, you know, at home doing female stuff. You know, he felt like they should just be at home taking care of the home. Like, where did he get that from? His mom was a working woman outside the home? I don't understand. And then I want to talk separately, too, at some point about his views on Christianity. So his mom was trying to take him to the Bible studies, and, you know, he's claiming he was raised a Christian. That's why I feel so bad for his mom. I mean, imagine being a Christian and you're talking to your son, and he's going through all these troubles and drug issues and stealing his sister's iPhone and breaking into people's houses, and his dad is getting him arrested. You know, I noticed his dad hasn't been coming to the sentencing, or didn't come to the sentencing hearing. You know, his dad is probably like, ugh. But his views on Christianity, Bryan said something about he was raised in Christianity, but, you know, he had his doubts and all that, but kind of like he could see a higher power in nature. Okay, so I understand. Yeah, some people can view God and God's creation in nature, and I even understand people who have doubts. But then, does Kohberger see now? Will he ever see? I mean, he was drawn that black heart in court. Has he completely given himself over to evil and that's just it? And those are the things I wonder. So Leon said that Bryan used his authority as a teaching assistant to inappropriately interact with female students. Leon stated he thought Kohberger wanted a girlfriend, and Leon said they talked about Bryan wanting a girlfriend on many occasions. So Bryan got a little bit of authority as a teacher's assistant. And he's using this, as they said, you know, in the book, Idaho 4 book, to, you know, inappropriately, like, stand by the doorway so women would have to, I guess, kind of squeeze by him. Or, we know all those photos of women he had on his phone, I guess from that July 9th pool party, the one on Dateline. You know, they were blurred, of course, on Dateline. But then supposedly one of the women recognized herself like, oh my goodness, that's a photo of me that was on his phone. I just see how he could have done this so differently. You know, in certain photos where you look at Bryan, some of them you can say, okay, he's not a bad looking guy. And then others, it's like, oh, he's completely evil. But if he had only gone the God route to me, the route of Christ. Like, I know he had his substances issues and all whatever the heck happened to him, but why did he choose the path of evil and destruction? That's what I'm trying to figure out. He could have, if he wasn't so obnoxious, the way he was acting with women. I should put a clip if I can find it. I just watched it from a guy who was in class with Bryan, and I'll find it and link to him, how he talked about, you know, Bryan even mansplained the word mansplaining, and he angered one woman so much she got up and walked out of class.
In class, though, he tended to over-explain basic concepts. It often felt like he was lecturing the room. except we were all grad students. One moment that stuck out. Another student called him out for mansplaining. Bryan then got into a semantics argument about what mansplaining meant. He was called out for mansplaining the term mansplaining. The student left the class early, leaving their stuff.
Yeah, sounds like something I would do. She even left her stuff, I think he said. He just sounded really obnoxious when he didn't have to be. To me, he could have used his entire past, his history, like not to lie about it, but you know, when you fall on the rock of Christ, just saying, look, I'm nothing without him. This is what I went through. Look, God got me into this WSU program. If he was, kind to everyone, if he was just intelligent, not trying to show off some smarts he thought he had, but just acted like a good guy and was really good internally, I really think Kohberger could have gone far. He could have eventually met a woman I guess he felt was up to his standards if Na-Young Ko wasn't or whatever. I feel like he could have gotten everything he wanted. But instead, Leon says Kohberger told him he might lose his TA position over an issue with Dr. S.
Pullman, Washington, November 2nd, 2022. Bryan is going to lose his job. Less than a month after their previous meeting with Bryan, so the cohort hears, Graduate Director Dale Willits and Department Chair Melanie Angela Newley are once again confronting Bryan about his behavior. There are no friendly suggestions this time. Doctors Willits and Newley tell Bryan what he already knows. Short of a miracle, he'll be fired. The cohort hears that the discussion about grading had not gone well. Women had later complained to Dr. Snyder and said Bryan had stared at them, that he'd positioned himself by the door and they'd had to get uncomfortably close to him to exit the room. One suggested he followed her to her car, as if. Bryan is so pissed. They'd be lucky to get close to him. He has stopped showing up to teach. So 2 weeks ago, John Snyder had formally notified Bryan he had failed to meet expectations as a TA. The students assume that Professor Newley wants to give students the benefit of the doubt, and that is why she and Professor Willits are giving Bryan a chance. Today, Doctors Newley and Willits suggest an improvement plan for Bryan, a way for him to show them he can lose the misogyny and genuinely behave professionally at an institution that expects that of both students and teachers. This improvement plan, they agree, will be emailed to Bryan, and they will meet again in a month to see how it's going. Bryan listens. Bryan's career as a graduate student is over. In this room now, they're just going through the motions. His bubble is bursting. His dream of a new life, a new persona, is being cut short. Professor Snyder emails the plan to him the next day. It contains words like courtesy and respect, the kind of thing he considers politically correct BS, so they want change. Yikes. So only 11 days later, Bryan would enact a disgusting change.
Whew. Yes, the Idaho 4 book does say, by November, Bryan's job was truly in danger. So back then, Bryan had asked Leon to help him fight the allegations, but Leon stated he refused to help Kohberger. Like, how's Bryan gonna ask Leon, help me fight these allegations when there were so many different people making complaints against Bryan, angering the women, talking down to them, mansplaining stuff. He even slightly did it, October 14th with the female officer. It's really interesting that a female officer stopped him. So he was still respectful, but he was like questioning, can you explain the law and what should I have done? Should I just have backed up? In Pennsylvania, we don't have crosswalks and all these lies and stuff, just weird, just weirdness. But it's a trip. He was asking Leon, he was getting desperate to help him fight these allegations. I'm sure by then Leon is like, look, I know who you are. I know you're a liar. I'm not helping you. It says Leon characterized Kohberger as a dishonest person. To support this, these allegations, give me a couple examples. Leon stated he spoke to Kohberger in late December 2022. And Bryan said he was packing his bags to catch a flight back to Pennsylvania. Leon later learned Bryan had already been back in Pennsylvania for some time and had driven back with his father. So all these stupid little lies, they say the little white lies, but they are indicative of a person's entire intent and personality. It's just weird. Stuff he didn't have to lie about. Now, obviously, this is after the murders, so we know Bryan was back. We saw he was stopped in Indiana, I think it was like December 15th, and then by then he made it home. So late December 2022, whenever he spoke with Leon and is like, yeah, I'm packing to catch a flight back. What's up with that lie? Lies that don't matter. Anyway, Leon then told us about some injuries he witnessed on Kohberger's face and hands. This is where I perked up. Leon was unsure of the date, but stated he thought he noticed the injuries on 2 separate occasions in October and November of 2022. Leon stated one injury was a large scratch on Kohberger's face, which Leon described as looking like the scratches from fingernails. So it must have been like, Leon said he also saw wounds to Kohberger's knuckles on 2 separate occasions. So now that we know how brutalized and even blunt force injuries Kaylee had to her face to the point where she was unrecognizable, part of me wonders, is that what the wounds to the knuckles were? Or people are wondering, how Kaylee's family thinks there was a second weapon. Was it, blunt force injuries? Could it have been something in the room? But wouldn't they have been able to tell if he had used something in the room for those? Not just, of course, all the knife wounds. Some people were wondering if he used the handle of the K-bar. It sounds like Kaylee's dad said it was like with a pattern on it, whatever those blunt force injuries were. I'm thinking, did he wear brass knuckles? Is that what gave him the injuries? But it's so weird that Leon noticed these injuries in October and November. So that's where part of me is like, okay, this October 14th incident with Ava Wood, he's sneaking around. If this was Kohberger, we don't know who it was, of course. Was he sneaking around? It's so close. It's right across the street from 1122 King Road. It's during a time Bryan was there. Was he trying to get in her place? Was he trying to get in many other places? Had he followed Ava around? With Bryan not sleeping, think of all the nighttime hours when most of us are sleeping. He's just used to wandering around for years and years and years. Not just stargazing, but gazing, I believe, at women, getting angrier and angrier that he just can't get along with people. He can't get whatever his ideal woman is. Obviously, his ideal woman would look like maybe Maddie, maybe Kaylee, maybe Xana, maybe Ava, the pictures of the women on his phone. Leon noticed all these injuries, and when he asked Kohberger about what happened to him, Bryan replied he had been in a car accident. So I don't know if there's any proof of that. We can search the VIN number of that white Elantra, and I'll see if I find any car accident reports. And of course, if he ever was in one, that doesn't mean he had the car accident in the white Elantra, but I like to do my research. I doubt any car accident Kohberger was involved in Washington was true, or Idaho, whatever. But I do wonder where he really got the injuries, especially any injuries in October. Now, it's pretty clear where he might have gotten November injuries, especially if they were injuries November 13th, November 14th, and after. If Leon noticed scratches, because we know the victims, the Idaho 4 victims, some of them had defensive wounds, I'm sure Xana fought like hell. Kaylee fought like hell. Oh, I just relived that in my mind. Like, oh my goodness, if only he hadn't done, a sneak attack in the middle of the night or early morning hours, knowing that they would be vulnerable, asleep. They had been drinking. Olivia's right. Kaylee probably could have kicked his butt, because Bryan does look like the kind of guy you could take. Like Kaylee, I feel like she could have taken him. Of course, if she would have known, because she had fears of a stalker. She liked to watch true crime, She liked to follow Chronicles of Olivia on TikTok. She knew, I'm sure, about safety. She just did not expect this maniac in the middle of the night with a K-bar knife coming in there with such ill intent. Anyway, Leon also mentioned that Kohberger was frequently 20 minutes late to their classes. So when did he start arriving late? That's what I'm wondering. Did he start arriving late to classes right away? Like, was that a habit of his? He's trying to be impressive, but then he's late to class. And then in the book, they talk about how weirdly Bryan Kohberger stood up at the front, silent for a while, before he was introduced, it was so awkward. It says, I asked Leon what he and Kohberger would talk about. Leon said Kohberger liked to discuss his area of study, which was criminal decision-making and burglary-type crimes. So burglary just means, entering a place. That's his specialty. I'm sure, Bryan's being up middle of the night, sneak attacks, entering people's homes. In the book, they talk about Bryan playing with two other friends in the woods when he was younger. In the Pennsylvania woods, the friends would run off, but they don't know where Bryan went.
Bryan Kohberger joined Quora in November 2012. Bryan began to look a lot different. At least he did in the social media profile photo on his Quora account. He joined in November 2012, but still has not filled out his profile. The profile photo he uploaded, however, shows a presumably 18-year-old Bryan with lighter hair that is closely cropped. We can only see part of his hair because he wore a hoodie partially covering his head. The ever-present headphones dangle from within his hood, and the strap of a black backpack can be seen on his right shoulder. Bryan does look noticeably fitter, but was it really his new vegan boxing routine helping him shed pounds? Or something more sinister within months? The reality of the substance that helped with his weight loss would become apparent when he tricked a good friend into giving him a ride to help him score. But first, Bryan would continue to find ways to break into homes to steal the gear he needed in order to fund his growing addiction. The Idaho 4 book reveals Bryan's trickery and manipulative ways with people who trusted him. It's 2013 in Saylorsburg, Pennsylvania, and Bryan turns what could have been a fun game of soldiers in the woods with his friends into a $25,000 heist and nearly gets caught red-handed. The 3 teenage boys are racing through the trees pretending they're Marines. This is the Poconos. Racing around in the woods with knives or guns is normal here. In these dense woods, the kids can play paintball all day and airsoft, and they can hunt critters. And they can lose one another for hours on end. 2 of the boys don't notice exactly where the third boy, a tall kid with bulging eyes, positions himself. They don't see if he's close to the house or even inside it. The house is invisible from the road. Its owner, Mark Bayless, a former Navy SEAL who is the father of one of the boys, bought it for precisely that reason. He liked its remoteness, that it was surrounded by woods. Mark is a skilled hunter of animals but also of men. But even though he's a Special Forces veteran with skills and experience, he cannot catch the person who is repeatedly stealing his knives, his coins, his prescription pills, his girlfriend's jewelry. It maddens him. He keeps calling the cops, but they are worse than useless. They show up, file a report, do nothing, so Bayless stays frustrated. Could the thief be one of the veterans he houses nearby as part of the charity he founded? That's a bad feeling. He doesn't put it together until years later that the thief must have been one of his son's friends. He doesn't see it in the moment, but he's sure later how it happened. The first time, he believes the tall, pale kid who weirded him out waited for the others to run off into the trees, then forced the lock and entered the garage where Mark kept his collection of army knives, and took one. On the next visit, Mark thinks he took another. One by one, they vanished. Next, it was Bayless's coin collection, worth $25,000. Bayless talks to his son Jack and his nephew Brandon about the thefts. He says he's going to catch the thief if they try again, shoot him. Jack tells the third kid, whose name is Bryan, that his dad is pissed. Bryan tells Jack he reveres his father. That's what he says, or at least what he puts in a text. But what he does, or what Mark thinks he does, smacks of something different than straight-up hero worship. Someone starts to stalk Mark Bayless. The stalker hides in those trees, camouflaged, munching on Reese's peanut butter cups, dropping the wrappers on the ground, waiting for Mark to leave on one of his orange motorbikes or in his pickup truck. The stalker forces the door open with a knife and heads for the bathroom, where Bayless keeps old prescription drugs. And the thief can guess where he'd keep jewelry, in the bedroom. One time the thief is up in the bedroom and hears wheels in the driveway. Bayless is back. Later, much later, Bayless puts the scene together in his head. He comes to believe that Bryan, knowing he has the element of surprise on his side, hides, waits for the veteran to walk toward the back of the house, then sprints out the front door and into the woods he knows will protect him, through the trees and onto the road, safe for now.
Instead of just playing with these little boys or young guys, I don't know how young they were, they were all around the same age, I guess, Bryan would allegedly use the opportunity to sneak in the dad's house. He knew how to break through the garage, and this guy was a Navy SEAL. And this guy started noticing his $25,000 coin collection missing. He noticed jewelry, he noticed all this other stuff missing. A lot of theft. And the guy was like, oh no, could it be, the veterans I helped? This guy was helping veterans and all that. Could it be one of them? He perished the thought. It turns out many years later, he looked back and said it was probably Bryan breaking in. This guy got so angry, he told his son, look, if I find who's doing this, I'm like, that guy. He didn't find out back then, but whoever kept breaking in kept stealing stuff. And in fact, one time he believes it was Bryan. Bryan may have still been in his house when he came in and just kind of waited. Bryan is probably a student of human nature, studying how people move and what they do and their habits. So the guy went back to the back room or somewhere, and Bryan used that opportunity to flee out the front. So that was the end of the interview. Bryan liked to talk with Leon about criminal decision-making, burglary types of crimes. So we already have, one woman in Pennsylvania, Jeremy Saba's mom, accusing Bryan of breaking in, stealing her stuff. The Navy SEAL accusing Bryan of breaking in multiple times, stealing stuff. And this is more than once, showing up at Jeremy Saba's home, not only to, steal her iPad, but also to come back and allegedly make amends. The Navy SEAL multiple times, he's talking about burglary crimes here. He obviously admitted to breaking in, going in without permission to be there, the 1122 King Road house, and committing all those homicides. Those are only the 3 that we kind of know of. How many other times was Bryan wandering around as his life was falling apart? He went out with his dad, so many hopes and dreams, look at how much his father and his mother cared for him.
April 2013. Effort. Pennsylvania. Bryan finished high school early, but he is a lost and troubled 18-year-old with a monkey nicknamed Smack on his back. Casey Arntz is playing a video game, The Sims, on a Friday night when she gets a text from Bryan Kohberger. She smiles because she likes Bryan. That's a bit of a controversial stance in her friend group. Bryan has had his ups and downs with her younger brother Tom, who says Bryan likes to get physical for no reason. One of Tom's friends, Brandon Andriola, says Bryan has a temper. There's also the fact that Bryan hangs out with Jeremy Saba, who Casey thinks is a jerk, and Saba is known to be a junkie these days. But she likes Bryan. He may not say much, but Bryan has always been sweet to her. He's solicitous in his texts. He always asks her how she is. Most recently, he's been asking about her work at the glitter manufacturer in New Jersey, about her career plans. She wants to go into interior design after college. Casey knows Bryan's plans. Bryan had graduated high school early in March 2013 and wants to go to college, maybe East Stroudsburg University, in the fall to study criminal justice. Tonight he's texting Casey because he needs a favor. He tells her his car broke down and he has to get to his cousin's house near Luna Rosa, a restaurant in Broadheadsville that's a 20-minute drive up Route 209. He doesn't say why. Casey says fine. She's happy to help Bryan. She feels sorry for him that he's stuck all the way up in Indian Mountain Lake in that weird gated community. It's a full mile from his new home to the security guard's booth. So she gets into her car and drives the 3 miles up the mountain to meet Bryan, who's waiting for her outside the security gate. She drives him to Luna Rosa. He pops in and out of the restaurant, then asks if she can swing by CVS quickly because he needs to buy needles for his aunt, who is a diabetic. Casey thinks that's a bit weird. Shady, actually. But it's hard to argue with such apparent compassion. She gives him the benefit of the doubt. When he's inside CVS, she thinks fondly of the times they've joshed together. Like when they used to play the game of things with Tom and Brandon, a party game where players guess who wrote which anonymous answer to prompts like things you shouldn't say to your mom. She misses those happy times. A few days later, he remembers to text her happy birthday. She thanks him, as she always does. But when she next sees Brandon, he tells her it's common knowledge that Bryan gets heroin at Luna Rosa. That's why he needed Casey to give him a ride there and back, and why he stopped to get needles at CVS. Casey feels sick. She realizes that most likely she was carrying heroin in her car. Had she been pulled over, she could have been arrested. Now Casey is mad. At 7:49 p.m. on May 21st, she sends Bryan a Facebook message, a rare instance in which she is driving the exchange, not him. I would like to hand you a big congratulations for lying to me about driving you around. I should have added up beforehand, but thought I was doing something nice for someone. So thank you. If you would have gotten caught, I would have gotten in trouble just for driving you around, not even knowing why. Needles for your aunt? Wow, real great story. Bye. A full day later, by May 22nd, 2013, at 8:33 p.m., he responds, "I'm in rehab. I know that," Casey writes back. She receives no reply, but as the weeks turn into months, she forgives Bryan. How could she not? He's back from rehab, and he's so patently lonely. He texts her repeatedly to ask if her parents will let them hang out. And when she doesn't respond, his texts become sadder and less frequent. In early 2014, Bryan tells her to be proud that she's making something of her life. "I'm not haha," he writes. Casey wishes that she could be nicer to him, that they all could be nicer to him. He seems to be struggling. On March 27th, 2014, nearly 1 year after the car ride to Luna Rosa, he sends a text. "You know I love you guys. Always will, even if we stop talking one day." What is Bryan talking about? What does it mean? Bryan gets arrested in 2014. He had not turned 20 years old yet. Perhaps by then, Bryan already knew that his 2014 arrest for theft wouldn't be his last, nor his most serious crime. Years before, he was accused of killing 4 college students in Idaho. Bryan was arrested in his native Pennsylvania and charged with misdemeanor theft for allegedly stealing his sister's iPhone, according to records reviewed by ABC News. It was his father, Michael, who reported the incident to police, according to the court records. Per ABC, Bryan was 19 years old when he was arrested for the alleged theft in 2014. He served no jail time according to officials. There is now no public record of that arrest or the outcome of the case. But this is how the authors of the Idaho 4-book paint that fateful day. Michael Kohberger doesn't want to make the call he's about to, but he has no choice. His own son is a threat to the family. None of it has worked. Not the boxing, not the diet, not the trips to the gun range or the move away from Jeremy Saba, Bryan's childhood friend who has gotten into heroin too. Not even a stint in rehab. Bryan can't stop using, which means he can't stop stealing. Now he's taken Melissa's cell phone and sold it at a mall kiosk for $200, half what it's worth. Actions have consequences. Children, whatever their age, need to understand that. So he closes his eyes briefly, then dials 911. The police arrive, read Bryan his rights, and cuff him. The kid is civil, barely looks at his dad. He knows who called the cops and why. There's a time to be calm, to talk to the police politely. This is where the book says Bryan is only 16. But according to my records, he was 19. It is difficult to tell if these records don't exist. Well, what did ABC News view? Hopefully Pennsylvania will send me something. Bryan knows that because he's only 19, there's a good chance this will be expunged from his record if he behaves. He'll go, again, to rehab. Outwardly, he'll be the good, polite son everyone wants. But inside, alone in the basement, Bryan lets his true feelings out on Tapatalk and SoundCloud, writing, recording, and posting an original rap song made for other sufferers of visual snow, a neurological condition that is the visual equivalent of TV static. The rage, the loneliness, just pours out of him. The words are layered over a beat that is equally staccato and furious, a track no one in his family is likely to hear, not until sleuths unearth it almost a decade later. But this is the real him. He rapped the following lyrics, always the same thing that disrupts my life. Wonder when I'll change. I guess when the time is right. Procrastinating my derange, to change would be a fight. So I'm pacifist, like I'm afraid to get a bloody fist. Look at this, my mind is pissed and I keep running. Why is this when I hit? It always leaves them stunning. Always gentle giant, no defiance. I'll build an alliance and still think that I am peasant. I'm stuck in the future, but I'm never looking at the effing present. Keep it up, act like you're all that. Here's a cookie too and a present. Lead from a desert eagle equals going louder than my mothering beagle. End your life. You get no sequel. Leave your loved ones crying like some seagulls. You are not my equal. You are evil, but I'm evil. Devil, Debo, and now I'm going regal. Don't F with us. Hope you learned your lesson. X or music.
Put up with him all those years, trying to help him, just trying to get him on the straight and narrow. His mom trying to take him to Bible study, all these things. His dad making that huge cross-country trip. I mean, you gotta really like to drive, to drop off Bryan, and then huge, to come all the way back. Those are some dedicated parents. Not every parent would do that, let me tell you. Out there, got there July 1st. He's already invited to a pool party by July 9th. And then October, November, even probably before then, it's all falling apart. He's back at it again, not getting along with women. I just wish, don't you think, Bryan would have took it amongst himself, instead of thinking, these people are trying to correct me at this university, and these words they're using, it's just political correctness. Instead of thinking that way, why wouldn't he say, maybe there's a point to it. It's not just one woman who I'm having a problem with. It's, multiple reports of just skeevy behavior. So wouldn't he take it amongst himself to say, well, let me look at myself and examine and see where I can change a bit? Obviously, Bryan didn't do that. He used it to fuel his anger, to blame people who didn't know him from Adam. These women, Maddie and Kaylee, Xana and Ethan, and Min, they're off living their lives, having fun, having their own issues. Bryan might have been sitting back seething, thinking, oh, they have life so easy. They're so beautiful. They're so perfect. But it's like they had their own problems too. So to me, it's just so unfair of Bryan to just target them for whatever reason, thinking they had the perfect lives, just taking them out. Like Kaylee's sister said, you had no right. They were not yours to study or take away or do whatever. Anyway, that was the end of that interview. Special Agent Hill and I advised Leon to reach out if he wished to add anything to what he told us, and then they concluded the interview. So since this is just a summary, I like to get the actual audio. So that's what I look forward to. Hopefully Moscow is great, let me tell you. Hopefully they have some of these videos and interviews ready. Hopefully they're fair with the pricing. I know it takes a while to edit stuff. Hopefully it's something that can come flowing in soon so we can start breaking down what the person actually said and not just, get a summary. So now the Ava Wood incident, of course, right there on Queen Road, right across the street, it intrigued me so much I requested the body cam video, the incident report, 911 calls, everything from Moscow PD. Now it says the City of Moscow received your public records request on July 17th, 2025. The request was asking for the police report related to an incident involving Ava Wood on October 14th, 2022, reporting someone jingling her doorknob at this 700 block of Queen Road. She doesn't live there anymore, but still, I won't give the address. Now it says, please be advised that a search for the requested record was conducted and no such records were identified to exist. Therefore, your request is being denied. So I was like, wait a minute, what? So I went back to the book and I reread it because I wanted to make sure I had the date right and everything. And I see I did. It says it's around 8 p.m. and pitch black when Ava Wood hears the knock at the front door of her home on Queen Road. She installed a Ring camera. After the murders, she can see a man standing there. Now, this was in February 2023. It was a Moscow PD uniformed man. But since the previous November, which I don't blame her, she doesn't trust anything or anyone. She keeps her door locked and waits. So I don't blame her. So he was knocking some more and she spoke through her Ring camera like, who are you here for? He's like, I'm here for Ava Wood. Ava had 3 new locks and an alarm system installed after the murders. So then she unlocked and opened the door. Good thing she had the funds for all that. So he gave her an envelope and he said, you're being subpoenaed for the state of Idaho versus Bryan Kohberger, the preliminary hearing in June. And Ava's like, she thought her legs might give way. Ava was like, oh my goodness, she started to shake. She'd never been subpoenaed. She's like, this is the Bryan Kohberger case? Who is it from? And the officer told her it's from Ann Taylor. She's like, the defense? And she's like, do I have to show up? And he tells her, yes, it's illegal to disobey. So Ava was freaking out. She slammed the door. She started crying. She called her parents. Now, thankfully, her dad's a lawyer. He specializes in bad faith litigation. Isn't that interesting? He said, look, call Thompson's office, the prosecutor's office. Let them know, okay, I got the subpoena. So she spoke to Thompson's assistant, and Thompson's assistant told Ava, maybe you better figure out what, Bryan Kohberger's lawyer wants. Okay, so Ava hopped on a Zoom call with Ann Taylor and her dad was there. And it says Ann Taylor was questioning Ava about something Ava told police the day of the murders. So I said, oh, okay, now that makes sense. This is something that Ava had related to police on November 13th, 2022. So she's thinking back to Friday, October 14th at 1 a.m. when she heard someone climbing up the metal steps to her apartment across the street from 1122 King Road, heard her doorknob jingling. The door stayed closed because of that deadbolt. So I said, okay, Ava told police this the day of the murders. I don't know if she was on video. I'm reminding myself now I need to do another public records request. If Ava had a formal interview, if she was on video, November 13th, 2022, that date, telling police about the prior incident. Now, the Friday, October 14th incident may not have freaked Ava out enough for her to call 911, but only later when she saw the evil that visited across the street, 1 month later, did she feel like it was important enough to call 911. And that's another thing I wanted to bring up. Some people are just like, hindsight, of course, is 2020. When you know something evil has happened, of course you're like, okay, call 911. But some of these kids, and I call them college kids, they may have been conditioned to not call 911. I want to see if I can find this in the interviews, but I had heard reportedly Dylan was kind of conditioned not to call 911. I don't want to say they looked at police as the enemy, but back then, before the murders, cops were only showing up, because of noise complaints generally, trying to find underage drinking. So they were kind of conditioned, I believe, in that 1122 house. Maybe overall is like, oh no, the cops are here, there's white claws there, and there's an underage drinker, whatever. They're kind of conditioned to not call the police. So that's why it could be someone's first instinct, but maybe not theirs. So that's why I believe Moscow PD told me, okay, we don't have evidence of that for Friday, October 14th. because Ava was like, wait, who's jingling my door? She calls her friend Mason. She had looked on Snapchat maps and saw him in the area. Did you just try and let yourself in? No. Ava was asking him to check the street. He didn't see anyone. So Ava went to sleep, it says. She didn't think anything more about it. But then Ann Taylor thought enough about it to say, did the police ever get back to you about the October incident? And she said no. So Ava apparently didn't make police aware of this October 14th incident. She didn't make them aware until the day of the murders, November 13th. But they never got back to Ava about it. Now, of course, they had bigger fish to fry on November 13th. Was it a rabbit trail they went down? I don't know. I don't know when Ava installed her Ring camera. Obviously, she must not have had it installed on October 14th. But Ava did ask police, wait a minute, was Bryan over here on October 14th? Those 12 times allegedly Bryan had pinged in the area? Was October 14th one of those times? I don't know if we have that information yet. As of the writing of the Idaho 4 book, Ava didn't know. So as more info like this comes out, it's like, it makes you wonder. So basically Bryan was falling down. His life didn't go as he planned, or maybe it did. Maybe he didn't, come out to Washington to plan these grisly murders. Maybe he really did have hope that his life, that he had turned over a new leaf, that, he would get his PhD, maybe he would get a job at the police station eventually, or wherever, I don't know, wherever he wanted to go with this. Maybe he thought he'd meet a beautiful girl, they'd get married, have babies. I wonder if that was in his mind. Or did he realize when his personality and his own actions and his own way of being and being condescending to people and off-putting, if that whole thing followed him and he, started making enemies in Washington as well as Idaho, once he realized he was back there, is that when he started with the whole night stalking? That's what I'm wondering. What point did he make the decision to just completely go the evil route? Maybe he will tell someone. And I was reading somewhere, oh my goodness, I have to watch the video. I just put it in my watch later. Another judge or someone was mad at Judge Hippler for not requiring, banning Kohberger from making money off of his crimes. Now, I automatically assumed, different states, Son of Sam law, or different states call it different things. I automatically assumed Idaho would have a law that prevents criminals from profiting off their crimes. So I was like, why is this one judge mad at Judge Hippler for not specifically requiring that? I mean, Judge Hippler made the speech about, I hope we forget Kohberger's name, and, I hope no one goes to interview him. Or he did say people should study him, but Judge Hippler wanted people to study him in private. But I was like, is that a thing? Why didn't he specifically write an order for Kohberger to not profit off of his crimes? I gotta look more into that too, because that surprised me. Anyway, it's time to close 2 Corinthians 10:17 through 18. However, let him who boasts boast in the Lord. For it is not he who commends and praises himself who is approved by God, but it is the one whom the Lord commends and praises. I thought that was a perfect ending, because it feels like Bryan truly was insecure. To me, only insecure people really need to boast about their intelligence and their accolades and what they know. Being humble is more attractive. I mean, I'm watching this great guy on YouTube who is like, oh my goodness, yeah, I was on drugs and I got kicked out. My mom and dad kicked me out. He's been living in a storage facility, and he's just so open and raw and real. Like, he's really attracting viewers because he's not bragging about his station in life. Anybody who tries to brag about how smart they are or how much money they have or how good looking they are, it just makes you look at them like, okay, what are you hiding? And so that's why I think about Bryan. Yeah, boast in the Lord. Like Bryan, if he had went the route his mother was trying to take him, he truly could have been delivered from all these demons, and he could have gone out to Washington and, scored a great girlfriend. He could have stayed in the PhD program. So many things could have been so different, and that's what's on my mind. So anyway, I will go through, continue reading, digging into whatever these documents have to reveal. So thank you so much for watching all this. Take care.